Evolutionary podcast coming your way, episode 496. Stevesmi and Da Mobster. How's it going, buddy?
That's good, mate. This drug, this SARM especially, is a fascinating one for me, Steve. So I'm interested. I'm going to enjoy this one. Crack on.
So in this one, we're going to be talking about our SARM series continues with Anabolicum LGD-4033. We're going to talk about the doses, cycles, benefits, and side effects. So a really interesting SARM. And it was discovered by Ligand Pharmaceuticals and perfected by SARMS 1. It binds to androgen receptors of muscle and bone selectively, just like that's why it's called the SARM, selective androgen receptor modulator. So the idea behind it was to give similar results as testosterone with only partial agonist activity on the prostate. So it's not going to give you those androgenic DHT type of side effects that anabolic steroids and testosterone would give you. So that was the idea. Developed as a way to treat diseases or conditions associated with muscle and bone deterioration. And the advantage of LGD over testosterone is a difference of activity it has on the body outside of muscle and bone. So the side effects, and that's why using SARMs is a much safer option if you don't want some of the side effects in the reproductive damage that anabolic steroids can give you. So let's talk a little bit about LGD now. When LGD first came about in the fitness industry, I can remember it was like the first main SARM that guys were buying. And this is evidenced not just in the bodybuilding and fitness forum world, which is, most of you listening come from that world, but it was also among athletes, both in college and professional, who were getting busted for LGD. There's a long list of guys and gals who have been busted for using LGD in professional and college sports. So it does have benefits to help them, or they wouldn't be using it in the first place. So what are the benefits? Building lean muscle mass, strengthening bone and muscle, and also some healing help, although it's not as good as healing as Ostarine is. So this is the most anabolic of the main SARMs out there, especially around the era when it came out. Now, since then, there have been improvements in SARMs. I would say that RAD 140, which is another SARM that we talk about in our SARM series, you guys can check out that episode, but that is kind of the big brother to LGD. So you first had LGD in the fitness world, and then you had the RAD 140 come out, which beat LGD. So this is kind of the smaller brother. So it binds very strongly to an androgen receptor, and it's going to cause anabolic and anti-catabolic effects. So it's going to help with preventing muscle wasting. So there's different ways you can kind of approach LGD. You can approach it in a PED type of area where you're breaking a plateau and gaining muscle and lean muscle and some strength, or you can take it, you can kind of look at it as more of preventing muscle wasting in certain situations. So we'll kind of get into how to use it later on. But the bottom line is, when you're using LGD, you're not going to be dealing with a large prostate. You're not going to be dealing with these crazy organ strain of the kidneys, the heart, the liver, like you would anabolic steroids. So it's not going to shed your head hair. It's not going to bloat you up from all the estrogen. So that's kind of the benefits of choosing the LGD over an anabolic steroid. So I'll bring in Mobster. Mobster, tell us your initial thoughts on LGD. You mentioned on the pre-show how fascinated you were by it. So tell us a little bit about it. I've used it several times, and I would say it's a pretty cool SARM.
One of the things something you just referenced, Steve, with regards to the anti-catabolic properties, guys, sometimes what happens is when you're on a diet and you're trying to lose body fat and get leaner, there's also a small but occasionally significant amount of muscle loss at the same time. So an anti-catabolic like LGD is retaining more of that muscle and preventing that loss while you're dieting away. You've increased cardio, you've lowered your carbs, you've lowered your fat, you've decreased the calorific intake, and you're trying to keep the muscle that you built up for the last year or whatever period of time up to the use of this SARM. Now, on the other things, what I was fascinated by was the way that medical studies are done. Now, we know, guys, it is what it is, whether you agree or disagree, that animals are used in medical studies. And specifically, what was mentioned here was 2 studies. One, Steve, where they castrated male rats. And that obviously, guys, removes the way that testosterone is created in a body. And the male rats were found to, I'll read the references, Steve, showed potent activity in skeletal muscle and weak activity in the prostate. In other words, guys, they added muscle and they didn't have issues with their prostate. A very small male rat prostate, but nevertheless, that was fascinating. But what was even more fascinating, Steve, in a separate study, which took taken over 4 weeks, 28 days, that they showed an increased muscle mass in female rats. So, guys, we know that there are different mechanisms of producing overall the signals from the brain and the testicles and the prostate, etc., which produces testosterone in the male, and specifically in the human being, of course, because that's what we are, versus the rats. But the rats are used to see the similar effects that would happen with drug use in human beings. Now, the fact of the matter is, a rat with no testicles added muscle is fantastic, but a female rat who's never born with that and will have naturally lower levels of testosterone compared to, say, estrogen, was also seen, as I said already, Steve, to gain muscle mass. I mean, they literally said there was an increase in the muscle fiber cross-sectional. Guys, that means bigger muscles. The rats, the female rats, got bigger muscles. The male rats maintained muscle tissue, gained a little bit of muscle tissue, and actually saw almost no activity in the prostate area. So that's fantastic, Steve. I mean, just on those things alone. I said before on podcasts for both anabolics, for SARMS, and even online, guys, if you want to know the effects that the drug's going to have on your body, look at the medical study and the medical use, especially the medical use, see what the effects are, and then they would obviously be they would be magnified when you're using for performance enhancing purposes and at performance enhancing doses. So again, Steve, these studies would have used clinical amounts of LGD. That's much smaller than the performance enhancing amount, and they still saw these positive effects. These are incredibly positive effects, even in male rats with no testicles and female rats. That's just amazing to me, Steve. If you look at it like that and you go, right, so a female gained muscle and a male with no testicles gained muscle, and now we're going to use it in a performance enhancing situation. It's just good. I mean, Steve, I think, has covered it already. It is quite, certainly at the time when the articles were being written, the strongest SARM that you could buy in terms of its anabolic effects. Now, as Steve said, others have been tweaked since, and there's, less side effects, greater positive effects. And again, of course, we will talk about stacking and so on and so forth. But especially when the article that we're referencing here for the podcast, it was the SARM, Steve, in terms of its anabolic effect. You guys aren't rats. You're muscular human beings, and you're going to the gym, you're lifting weights, and you've got on-point nutrition. You should do, therefore, to get the best benefits. You're not a rat in a cage with no testicles or a female rat. So the benefits you're going to get is going to be above and beyond what they were using with clinical doses in a clinical situation. Steve, that's absolutely fantastic. And it's the reason why, especially when they first came out, that SARMs were so fantastic, not just in clinical medical situations, but in performance enhancing situations. I mean, as I said, Steve, these rats haven't got medical conditions, but a lot of the time the treatment that they were being created for, the medical conditions that they were being created for, they were still seeing retention of muscle mass and sometimes growth of muscle mass and an increase in strength. And again, that's in a clinical medical situation with clinical medical doses. So this is the reason why SARMs are so incredibly popular and should be even more popular than they are today, Steve. Back to you.
So let's kind of get into the best way to use LGD. We've talked about, gave you the synopsis of what LGD is capable of doing. So there's really two popular ways that guys and gals like to use LGD. And the first way is going to be a strength stack. And then the second way is going to be bulking stack. So in a strength stack situation, the way I would stack LGD is I'd run the typical dosage, which is between 10 to 20 milligrams a day. Some guys go to 30. And then if you're a female, you're going to run half that. So anywhere from 5 to 15 milligrams a day for females. And I think in this situation, a good strength stack would be LGD plus S4 plus S23. And those three together would be really, really good for strength. Now with the S4, you want to run at about 50 milligrams with the S4. Now with bulking, you're doing a similar thing, but instead of the S4, you're swapping in the RAD 140. So with the RAD 140, you want to run the RAD run 40 10 to 20 milligrams, and then run the LGD 10 to 20 milligrams. And that would be a really good strength steroid, strength stack using these SARMs. And that would go 8 to 12 weeks. So you'll notice 4 weeks into it, a change in your strength. You'll notice a change in your bulking into it. You'll definitely notice that you are basically having a difference, but it's not going to be a crazy difference like you would on steroids. You're not going to bulk on the stack and gain 20, 30 pounds. You're going to bulk on the stack and gain 3 to 5 pounds, but it's going to be good, clean, lean muscle mass. And then in terms of strength, you're not going to add 50 pounds to your bench like you could jumping on Anadrol and Tren, but you're going to add 5 to 10 pounds of good, clean weight improvements to your lifts, and it's not going to cause you to get injured in the process because you're not improving drastically very, very fast. So those are really the two things that LGD does really well. And at the end of the day too, Mobster, using it by itself, nothing wrong with that. I don't know why people think you can't use these things by itself. You can just run LGD solo and have a good, clean, smooth cycle, 8 to 12 weeks, 10 milligrams a day, and you would have both. You'd have an improvement in your bulking, and you have an improvement in your lean muscle mass and in your strength. So it would really, really be a good option for that too. And the side effects would be almost nothing when it comes to LGD. And we'll get into the side effects in a second. But Mobster, yeah, definitely chime in with your thoughts.
A little bit of a word of advice here, guys. And to be fair, when we talk about stacking versus running a product solo, we're quite often referencing our own personal experience and, of course, experience of many, many users over a great period of time. And naturally, we go off and we do research. We talk to some sort of forum members and people who've already stacked a product or run a product solo, just to give you an indication of how stuff works. And a good example was a guru that I was familiar with back in the day, Steve, talking about when people said, how do you know how that stack works? How do you know? In fact, two gurus, and I've referenced them both before, Mick Hart and the late Paul Borison. And both of those gurus had, at some point or other, worked with thousands of athletes, thousands of users. I think Mick claimed 10,000. And he was also talking to, I think one comment he made was relating to the then Greek weightlifting team. And I'm talking about a long time ago. So here's the thing. When it comes, if you didn't have that information, and if you specifically want to know how a drug works with you as an individual, then I always recommend, if only for experimental purposes, Steve, running it on its own. In that way, you can see exactly how you interact with that drug, exactly what results you get, exactly what side effects you get, and so on and so forth. And obviously, you want a good source when you're doing that. Now, as I say, the work's already been done. When we talk about the stacks, when we talk about the results, we're talking about the average, the typical user. And again, that comes from thousands, if not tens of thousands of athletes, tens of thousands of users. So I have run, especially in my early days of performance enhancing use, drugs solo. Debol on its own, Steve, Anavar on its own, and so on and so forth. And what the stacks that I have done have been very, very simple. So I can say, oh, I got this from this and that from that. But sometimes could be slightly confusing, and especially if you're a new user, guys, is to do a stack straight away, a safe stack, a low dose stack, the kind of stacks that we referenced, but you won't know specifically how you interact with one drug because you did multiple drugs right at the beginning. And we see this from time to time. But that's, again, as I say, because we're talking about referencing sometimes tens of thousands of users at the doses that we're talking about. And because we know of those users, some of them have run drugs that we talk about solo and then combine them together at sensible doses and so on and so forth. So keep that in mind, guys. Again, it's one of those, take your time. You don't have to gain 20 or 30 pounds in the first year. You can train for life, you can live for life, you can eat well for life, and you can, if you want, take these drugs solo just to see the specific effects. You can do a low dose cycle, then a medium dose cycle, and a high dose cycle. But ultimately, it's time consuming, and I get it. I don't want to spend 5 or 10 years of my life working my way through all these drugs just to see what works and then start combining stacks. So it's a swings and roundabout situation, as we will say here in the UK. Ultimately, LGD has been shown with users to produce the results that we're talking about. And then when we start to talk about stacking, as an example, Steve, something as simple as LGD combined with cardarine. So you've got that muscle gaining and increasing strength that Steve talks about. Again, not steroid-like, but certainly better than some SARMs. And then the increase of energy and the decrease in body fat that comes with the increase of energy and increased activity that comes with cardarine. And then with something like that, I'd probably throw in some sort of organ protective and maybe a mild, especially towards the end of the cycle, which I would keep nice and short, testosterone boost to begin the process. So it's, again, these experiments have been covered by many other people on your behalf, guys. Lots of other athletes, lots of performance enhancing users have looked at it, they've tried these other things, and that's where that information comes from. Sometimes, of course, and we do have that example, it also comes from the clinical studies. And as I say, they can be double blind, as Steve and I know, which essentially means that the people doing the study don't know who's received the product or the placebo. And then they're still seeing in the product samples increases in muscle, which they did with LGD. So that's to me is just fascinating, Steve. And again, it's explaining how we come up with these comments and how we come up with the references and so on and so forth for studies, and especially more so for how to stack a product, because we know that we've got people out there that have done the experience, done their work for you guys. That's how it works.
So side effects, we got to go over the side effects. Then I want to talk a little bit as well, Mobster, about some of the athletes that have been busted for LGD to give you an idea, the broad range of use for it. But, you know, side effects of LG, when it first came out as a SARM, a lot of us were using it and we would get blood work done. We noticed a little bit of, you know, suppression. Again, it's not going to be like anabolic steroids where your LH and your FSH levels tank to 0 like you would on anabolic steroids. But in this case, it drops by about half, from 5 to say 2.5. So it's easier to recover from an LGD stack. When you're using LGD by itself, not much side effects when it comes to organ strain. But when you stack LGD with a bunch of other SARMs, like in the strengths stack or the bulking stack that I mentioned, you're going to have more organ strain. You're going to have more liver. It's gonna obviously hit your liver a little bit. It's gonna hit your kidneys a little bit. It's gonna hit your heart a little bit. Just like any foreign substance you put in your body, if you put too much of it, it's going to make it harder on your organs, and that's why your organ numbers will kind of get out of whack. So that's completely normal for it to happen. But if you just use it by itself, can't expect much. I mean, you're not gonna have much of an issue at all. I ran it. I think I ran it for 8 weeks. Then I ran like a 4-week mini PCT. A mini PCT is really simple. Run a low dose of Clomid, low dose of Novadex, and run some a strong testosterone booster with it. Or you could just run a really good testosterone booster solo and don't even worry about running Clomid or Novadex. And you'll recover, you'll bounce back a lot quicker. It's a lot easier to bounce back when your LH is at 2.5 down from 5, then when your LH is at 0 down from 5, like you would on anabolic steroids. So it's one of the benefits of LGD. You can run it and not have that type of suppression and shutdown. So, I got to make this note too, Mobster, because we didn't mention on our last episode too. Maybe you could touch on it for a couple minutes. Yeah. The use of LGD, over the years has kind of been misleading in a lot of ways, because a lot of guys who were using LGD didn't know they were actually using LGD. So can you talk about that for a couple minutes? Because most of the LGD out there is not really LGD. Talk about that for a couple minutes and I'll kind of get into the athletes.
Yeah. I mean, this to me, guys, this is one of those kind of, it's simple but annoying at the same time, Steve. So when a SARM or an anabolic first comes to the market, or should quite often, Steve, these things have been around a very long time, which should I say more appropriately, comes to the notice of athletes and those wishing for some sort of performance enhancement. Unscrupulous creators, and I'm being very nice and polite when I say that, want to give you what you're asking for, but they are not necessarily going to go out of their way to try and source the actual product. I mean, a good example of this, very, very popular back in the day, meal replacement, very famous at the time, came in 2 different containers and you had to mix them together. So there's a big clue for some of you guys that know what I'm on about, and was unbelievably great compared to, say, a protein powder or similar. And well, it became so popular that the company that was producing it at the time found it difficult to keep up with demand. And then lo and behold, fake versions of this came out. Now, I've actually seen a company in this country, Steve, that was one of the bigger companies a few years ago. It's not so big now. And I would go on eBay and I would see guys that had printed the labels themselves at home and put it on a plastic tub, and it was almost, but not quite identical, with the spelling and the words and the reference and so on and so forth. And this happens, of course, if that happens with a protein powder or a meal replacement, Steve, you can be fucking sure 100% it's going to happen with an anabolic steroid, and it's going to happen with SARMs. So what happens, of course, is that something like LGD comes out, people go, it's amazing, I'm not having issues with the prostate, I'm not having problems with my hair falling now, but I'm still gaining muscle. Yeah, I'm not gaining 20 or 30 pounds, but I put on 5 pounds and I had none of the other side effects. So unscrupulous companies quite love to come out with a bottle that looks identical with next to no, if any, active ingredient in the bottle, tastes the same, similar looking label, call it LGD, and it's just a fake. And the joke of it is, Steve, is sometimes no more than, say, medical alcohol, or worse, just water in a vial with the little clip and the rubber bung and all the rest of it, and a lovely looking label, sometimes with holograms and the raised text and everything, and it's just water. And I mean, literally just water, guys. And they'll charge you the same amount. And especially when SARMs are new, as I say, steroids, something comes to the notice of the public and they start to use it, expensive. So you can be talking about $100 a bottle for something that's probably cost them less than $2. In fact, fractions of that if they buy enough of the bottles and the labels and so on and so forth. They can have amazing boxes, amazing labels, holograms, the whole, and there'll be nothing in it, Steve. And it's $100. It's literally just water. And guys, what's even worse, as Steve and I both know, sometimes it's not even clean water. Sometimes it's unfiltered water. Sometimes it's contaminated water. And it's just horrendous. But this happens. So you'll get the legit real deal. I'll give an example. There's a former professional British bodybuilder that does some great vlogs on YouTube. And he talked about he was able to source for himself anabolics from a French pharmacist and would bring them into the United Kingdom. He'd go to France, buy a few £100 worth, bring them back in his luggage, show them to customs, pay the VAT to bring them into the UK. And he wasn't that familiar with the sourcing in the United Kingdom, but he'd found this amazing source in France. It was a sensible price. He got what he wanted. He come over here and he was gaining muscle. Of course, in the United Kingdom, same as every other country, we would have great sources, and then sources were absolutely faked. And believe you me, as an Steve knows, we know, for example, and I'm not going to name the company, a company that advertises in bodybuilding magazines right now that uses steroid-like names for products that have, if they have any testosterone in, Steve, it's in the tiniest legal amount that they could possibly put in there by law, and not have it to be an anabolic steroid that still has an anabolic steroid-like name. And then when you look at the prices, Steve, it's almost identical to the anabolic steroid itself. So guys, trust me, when it comes to SARMs, when it comes to anabolic steroids, these things happen. You can be, there's a legal company, the tiniest, most minuscule amount of testosterone possible in there, using a name that they don't own, that is in common usage, and charging you hundreds of dollars. And when SARMs come out and people go, they're absolutely great, they're amazing, they're wonderful, etc., etc., supply demand outstrip supply, and unscrupulous people come along and create products that look almost the same, taste the same, but even if they have any active ingredient in it, it's very rare, probably none whatsoever, Steve. And I said they're really, really lazy. I mean, guys, we've seen this. Steve could tell you this. We've seen products like that where they've got floaters in, and I'm talking about hair and bits of skin, and and again, it'll be $100 or more, and especially when something's new to the market. What do you think, Steve?
Look, I think that about the end of the day, you got to come on our forums and you got to ask,
Yeah,
hey, you got to make sure you're getting a legitimate source for these
up to
SARMs,
date,
because it's
up to
all,
date. Yeah,
you know, it's really bad out there. It's really, really bad. And, you know, at the end of the day, you know, this type of industry, it's an attractant to grifters. And we see these grifters on social media. They're trying to basically, they'll put out videos, they'll do a lot of shock value, they'll be controversial, and then they'll try to sell you, you know, their crappy product.
version.
And then at the same time, they're stabbing you in the back. We've done episodes about some of these scumbags, you know, previously, and we've called them out. And a lot of them have, you know, their fanboys that are completely oblivious to it and just don't even realize that they're getting screwed over. So make sure you come on our forums. If you want real LGD, come on our forums and find out where to get it. So Mobster, I'm gonna just let me go over and I'll let you finish out the show. But then I got to go over these. Let me go over some of these guys that have been busted, guys and gals. So Will Greer, back in 2015, he was a Florida Gators quarterback. He ended up getting drafted by the Carolina Panthers. He didn't have a successful NFL career, but he got busted for LGD. It was a big story back in 2015. Joakim Noah, NBA, he got 20 game suspension in 2017 for testing positive for LGD. 2019, Australian swimmer Shayna Jack tested positive for LGD. She competed at the 2017 World Aquatics Championships. She won 2 silver and 2 bronze medals. 2019 Canadian sprint canoeist Lawrence Vincent Lapointe. He got busted. He tested positive for LGD. So, and at the end of the day, you know, we got athletes from all walks of life. ATP tennis singles competitor Nicholas Jerry from Chile. Back in 2020, he got tested for both LGD and Winstrol. So why are they using LGD? They're using LGD to give them the benefits of anabolic steroids, but they're under the impression, yeah, I won't get caught. These aren't anabolic steroids. Well, they're getting tested for LGD. So if you're a tested athlete, you run the risk when you use it of getting busted. So don't use it if you are a tested athlete. That's my final advice on that. You know, you cheat, you're taking the risk of getting caught, and you're taking the risk of losing a lot of money and a lot of having a lot of headaches in the process. So, Mobster, why don't you finish out with your final thoughts and take us into the disclaimer? It was a great show again.
So, guys, I mean, something that I've mentioned on the forums again, and I'll reference here. I was slightly disagreeing with a comment made by Steve earlier on in the difference between a mini PCT and a full PCT. And I think it's dose dependent, Stephen, especially regarding the reaction that some users would have. So one of the things I've said in the past, and we occasionally see this, Steve, with guys haven't fought to get either a mini PCT or a full PCT in place while they begin a cycle, and or they want to skimp on the bucks that they need to spend. I'm of the opinion that if you can, and especially with LGD, you want to run, if possible, a full PCT. So the info for mini PCTs and full PCTs are on our forums, so come and check that out. Spend the extra bucks, guys. If you're going to spend a few $100s putting together a decent SARM cycle, spend another few $100s putting together a full PCT. Full recovery in between cycles, and you'll see the benefits in the long term. That's number one, Steve. Number two, quality referencing via the forums. What do I mean by that? So, for example, companies will come along that are amazing, and then sometimes they fall out of favor. And they fall out of favor because they start off with a really, really good product, and then they start to cheap at some point by lowering their dosages, by not using a good quality source for their own raw products. You start to see issues with side effects for some of the guys, like a greater increase in post-injection pain and so on and so forth. So one of the things that we talk about constantly on the forums when we talk about approved sources is these can change over time. As I say, start out amazing, drop off in quality towards the end. they fall out of favor, and they fall out of favor because someone else is bringing out a better product, a product which perhaps is as good as the first company's was when it started. So you keep up to date by coming onto the forums and asking for quality sources, asking for what we call approved sources. And those tend to be companies that are producing, well, it should be companies that are producing properly dosed, clean, useful, effective products. And they get to stay in the place if they're number one or number two by consistently being like that. You will see sometimes competitors diss them and we say, can you prove it? And then you never hear from them again. We like to see companies that produce test, certificate of analysis, and so on and so forth. And the big, well-respected companies that stay around and are the ones that we approve have those tests in place. They are consistently good for a reason. That's the reason why they're approved. That's the reason why we support them and recommend them when you come onto the forums. As always, guys, please note, we're not doctors and the opinions are ours and ours alone. It is our view and is based on our experience and views on the topic. Our podcasts are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.